Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's the last show and you're all probably ready to go home, but hopefully we'll be having an interesting discussion over the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes. So today, the topic that we're looking at is digital interactions and data decision making. We've got a few key panel members here who I would love for them to introduce themselves. So I will not introduce yourselves. You can introduce yourselves for you. Gabe?
Sure. Thanks, Becky. Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriel Cedar. I'm Vice President for Global Development with Destinations International. DI is a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit association representing DMOs, CBBs, tourism boards, tourism ministries around the world. So pleased to be here and talking about digital interactions and data-driven decision-making. Thanks, Becky, for the invitation and for hosting.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Gabe. My name is Gadi Ashkar. So I'm the territory manager at Airbnb for the MENA region based in Dubai. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually super happy to be physically here because 2 days ago I was squatting and I stayed down. So I've been lying in bed for the past 2 days. So I'm extremely happy to be here. Up to you.
Thank you. Great that you could make it to join us. And, so hi, everyone. I'm Dave Goodyear from Oxford Economics with Becky, and I head up a lot of our forecasting and economic impact research with a particular focus on tourism, hence presence at this event.
Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Evian, Director of Data Analytics and Insights with Tourism Economics, where I head up the work we do on the Symphony platform, which is a business intelligence platform for DMOs. So, Becky, I'm glad this is late in the afternoon on day 4. Was heavily jet lagged coming in from the US, so it's good.
It worked in your favor.
Did.
Fantastic. Well, let's kick off. I want to start by looking into the fundamentals of data-driven decision-making. That's quite a mouthful. We should have changed that name. Data-driven decision-making. To start, in a few key words, could you, well, first of all, in your opinion, what is it? And some of its importance. Gabe, perhaps you can start us off.
So the question is, what is data-driven decision-making?
What is it to you? Yes.
Sure. So I think my perspective may be a little bit different from some of the people in the room. I'm not a marketer, and I've got a little bit of a marketing background, but I'm not a marketer. And most of the organizations that we represent, of course, are tasked with marketing and leveraging data to make tactical and strategic decisions for marketing and thinking about how they're driving their marketing spend. But a lot of the ways that we use data and that we work with our members to use data is in the area of advocacy and in the area of reporting on the impact that they have. And so thinking about how they're able to leverage data after having made decisions and thinking about how they're leveraging data to tell a story and to tell a narrative about the work that they're doing is something really important. And I think maybe something we'll dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that a little bit further. Gadi, perhaps you could give us a little bit of a view from Airbnb's perspective.
So regarding Airbnb, on that end, I'm just going to have more of an analogy approach on what I believe data is and what isn't important. So if you take Airbnb or any other company, imagine yourself, you're this big boat having thousands of employees and stakeholders, and you're on this vast ocean, and you're heading towards this kind of destination that you have, right? And you have the horizon in sight. Data for me is basically all the elements that you have to take into consideration, like the stars, the currents, the tides, high, low. You might end up in a storm and you have to navigate out of it. And eventually, you have kind of your captain, your navigators, and all the teams on that boat that help you navigate towards that objective or mission that you have as a company. So that's for the cheesy part.
No, I like it. I like the analogy. At least it gives us all something to work towards. Dave, from your perspective?
Well, what is it in a word? I think is essential. It's just the way we do business now, particularly when it comes to travel. So much of what we do has moved online. Whether it's your booking, planning coming before that, actually travel within a destination, experiencing. You're permanently online. You're using your phone and sharing your experiences. That then goes to your friends, who then look at that inspiration for the next trip. It's how we as travelers operate. But for destinations, for businesses, all of those different online touch points provide data, and that should be harnessed to better understand travelers, provide better content, provide better products.
Thank you, Dave. Eric?
Yeah, for me, the data-driven decision making is key, and I think too often I've seen both at destination level and to some extent in businesses, although they're a little bit further ahead than some of the destinations. You too often go back and look at, hey, I need to justify the decision I made 6 months ago on why I went into this market or why I made this plan, because a lot of it's based on, in the past, intuition or how we've always done it. There's more data now than ever before, right? Using that data and action that data, whether it's for marketing, sales, or advocacy purposes, is key. And being proactive about it and really help guide your path forward is something I think, especially on a destination level, we could get a lot better at. But even on the corporate side, to help kind of lead the way.
Fantastic. Gabe, I just want to dig a little bit more into what you started to say a little bit with your introductions. I mean, clear goals and objectives are really the key to making the approach efficient. What advice would you give a destination starting out with this approach? How would they begin?
Sure. So the question is how are destinations using goals and objectives? Yeah. So I would go back to the point that I made a minute ago around using data for storytelling and for thinking about how you're supporting a particular narrative. And I'll give you an example. And it's actually an example that I heard from a colleague of one of my panelists recently, where they were dealing with a destination. I think maybe it was Houston or a fairly major destination in the U.S. where they were under some pressure from the funders that were saying, look, we're giving an awful lot of money to the DMO of Houston, and when we look at how visitors are actually spending money in the destination, we see that money is being spent in the downtown central business district. It's going to restaurants, it's going to hotels, but it's not clear to us why we're investing so much money and only seeing a benefit to this one very small area. And so we worked with this destination to say, look, how do we dig into the data that you have available, using some resources from some of our colleagues here on the panel, and to look at how that money is actually being spent and how those funds are being distributed around the destination. And so they did something kind of interesting where they actually produced 2 maps. And the first was sort of a heat map that showed where visitors are going within the destination and where they're spending money, using data from Visa and MasterCard, for instance. And sure enough, that map demonstrates that spending is occurring in the area that you would anticipate, around the convention center, the major hotels, the restaurants, the downtown area. But they then layered on another map, which looked at the areas within the city where the employees of these businesses actually lived. And so what you see all of a sudden is that while the spending is occurring in this downtown area, the people that are benefiting from this, the employees that are working in tourism and hospitality, actually live in all of these outlying areas. And so the money that's being spent in downtown is actually going into the pocket of these employees, who are then going out to these disparate areas. And so when the city comes to the DMO and says, how are you supporting, for example, our economic development objectives, which say that we need to spend, or we need to drive spending, we need to drive economic development in these outlying areas, they're able to point to, for example, how these funds are being redistributed out into that way. And so it's somewhat of a long-winded answer, but I think that it speaks to this idea of creating a narrative and leveraging data in order to support that narrative in a way that I think is strategic and compelling as well.
Yeah, exactly. And really, it's what you're saying is it's what are the trends, what are the key metrics we can get out. And Dave, maybe that moves us on to you. I mean, finding trends and patterns is a key outcome of data decision making. How important would you say it is when we're looking at new projects and the approach, and what are the benefits of taking that sort of outcome?
Yeah, it's absolutely key. I think it's a great example there. I'm not sure I can elaborate much more on a specific example of that. I think that tells you what the benefits of using data are to help build that narrative, help to understand your particular destination. But it's not something that should be done just as a one-off. That's something that all this data is being created all the time. It's something that you should be analyzing. And once you understand what your destination looks like, what the business looks like, what the visitor looks like, then you can sort of see how that evolves over time. So, are those patterns of visitation changing? Is the cross visitation changing? If there's a new attraction, who's that bringing in? Is it bringing in a totally new market, or are people just adding it on to their existing trips? It's having that baseline really helps you to understand how things evolve over time. And as to who it benefits, it does benefit everyone related to the destination. I think there's three sort of main stakeholders that we identify when we've looked at this in research. So there's all the the businesses that are directly receiving, so sort of the downtown areas, the people sort of where the spending takes place. They're getting people coming in, so they're able to understand their visitors. They're able to receive that additional revenue. Then you've got sort of the destination, the wider city, the example. So how does that filter through the rest of the economy? What other associated spending might there be? But then the other element of that would be the travellers themselves. Because you can understand them better, you can provide better products to them, you can provide clearer information to them, they have a much better time, much better experience, more likely to return, arguably spend more for your destination as well. But the definite benefits for all of those three areas.
No, fantastic. If we take that a little bit further and look at it from a regional perspective, Gadi, coming on to you, how does data differ in the region, and how could the approach, if it does, how would you approach it a little bit differently?
So, with Airbnb's perspective, I think the tools are the same, right? You use the same tools to look at the data. The variables may differ. If we look at the region, we have the combination of the pandemic, the Expo 2020 that was pushed a year later, then you have the World Cup, you have the rise of digital nomads and rapid organic growth, means that it's a bit difficult to use the traditional pattern-driven data analysis, right? You can't look at the past years and be like, okay, you know what? Based on that, we're going to be projecting that next year we're going to do that. So in our industry, what's important is to look more at the rise and fall of travel corridors and how they impact the preferences of the guests, right? So an example of that, for example, would be Morocco. Morocco was a big market for us in the MENA region before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, the country went into lockdown, and it only reopened last year. So our focus had to shift from one country to another based on that data. And Dubai obviously became one of our top priorities. If we look at the trends for digital nomads that I mentioned, you have people booking more and more long-term stays, booking for a month, 3 months, and then us as a company, we need to start developing our features to tend to that guest preference. And then at the same time, since Dubai is one of our most professional markets when it comes to hosts, we have to have market managers like myself going to hosts, educating them on the preferences that those guests want. Another example, we have 80% of our guests that are international, right, coming to Dubai. Guests coming from a village in France are not going to have the same expectations that someone living in Dubai and used to that landscape. A very basic but extremely accurate example is noise. So people living in Dubai, I'm sure you're familiar with the constant, never-ending construction all across the city. You have the Ferrari and Lamborghini cruising on the highway, and then that's just an everyday thing in Dubai, right? But someone coming from a village in France, they don't know that. So when they come, it impacts their entire journey because that's not in their expectations. So we have to go and tell the host, listen, put yourself in the shoes of those customers that are coming. We have the data. We tell you who you're supposed to target and how you're supposed to target them. And the same thing goes for the passport. So when you come to an Airbnb in Dubai, you have to give your passport to check in, go to the reception. You go to France, the US, Italy, they never heard of this. So someone comes to Dubai, they're like, why do they want my passport? So it already brings a bit of a doubt around the journey. So we try to do our best to improve the journey from start to end using all the data.
That's a really good point. Actually, I just want to build a little bit more on what Gardi was saying in terms of there being no historical data. And Dave, I'm going to come to you for this one. How do destinations start, given that there's not that historical data there, there's not that pattern that we can really follow, like there is in Europe or the US? You know, how would you approach, I mean, I know you've got a lot of experience in the area, so how would you approach, you know, a new project looking at, you know, a specific destination in the region? That's for you, Dave.
Aimed at me. Okay. Yeah, starting a new project, anything looking at the data, yeah, it is you know, a challenge. You've got to be, I guess, collecting, you know, as much data as you can, you know, but like any, you know, it's new data sources, but like any sort of analysis, any research, you know, you've got to do your, you know, your due diligence. You've got to look and understand what the data is actually telling you, you know, what potential limitations there might be on that data set at the outset. What could it be telling you? You know, understanding what sort of sample sizes might be, particularly for it. So just understand that quality. But I think when you're approaching any of this, I think, you know, having that, you know, the approach, having the right skills to approach it is also absolutely critical. Just having data isn't a magic bullet. You know, it can help illuminate a huge amount of things, but, you know, you do need to interrogate it in the right way. I think the other thing you need to do is sort of be open to what the data is actually going to be telling you. And, you know, it's great to go in with an objective, understanding, okay, this is what we're looking for within this data. But if it tells you something different, you know, you can't sort of force the data to reinforce your opinions. You know, that's something we have seen all too often. I know the example would be some work we're actually carrying out with some of Gardi's colleagues elsewhere at Airbnb, looking at exactly sort of the longer stay guests and how that might be sort of manifesting. And sort of we had the preconception of, like, let's measure this, let's see what the effect is across a number of destinations. And you know, going in with the preconception, this was really going to be sort of helping drive dispersion. It was going to be going to all the rural areas. It's people wanting to escape from the busy places. It's because you can work anywhere, they're really going to go and work anywhere that there is good connection. And yes, a lot of that did happen, but we're actually finding, no, there's actually a really big urban story going on in this. A lot of people going to cities, coming to Dubai, for example, as well within that. So, yeah, not having those preconceptions at the outset is important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, Eric, I'm going to come on to you next. When we're talking about how we find the right KPIs for clients, you know, how would you advise, you know, someone looking to start out in a new approach, build a new sort of data platform? What sort of KPIs would you be advising them to start tracking and start looking at?
Oh, wow, depends what's available, right? But there's some of the low-hanging fruit, like lodging data. If you have lodging properties in your destination, whether that's short-term lodging or the more traditional hotels, air travel data if you have an airport in your area, human movement within your destination. What do people actually do when they arrive, right? What neighborhoods do they go into? What attractions do they go to? Look at the cross-visitation of those, which will help inform your marketing efforts, and to a certain extent also your advocacy work. Understanding a little bit better of not just who's coming, but what they're doing while they're in market could be extremely powerful, not just for a destination, but anyone who's looking to do business in that destination, whether that's a airline or a lodging partner or others. Obviously, you have some of your more internal metrics in terms of web traffic, social media engagements, and how all of those, all the things that you do as a DMO to help influence travel to the market. I'm always a big fan of making the destinations or DMOs essentially the subject matter experts of tourism in their destination. I came from a DMO, worked in Philadelphia, headed up research there for about 8 years prior to joining tourism economics. And one of the most frequent questions we had was from developers or airlines coming in to try to develop new routes. You know, who's coming? What are they doing here? How long? What's their length of stay? Are they just coming in, going up to New York? What's kind of their travel patterns, and why should we invest here? Creating these very quick destination insights, destination market summary reports, creating these dashboards for internal use where you can drill deeper into the details and help inform your internal teams. Both are equally important, right? But informing your stakeholders, again, from a destination level, hotels have data on their own property and maybe their sister properties, and to a certain extent, their comp set, right? They don't necessarily know from a destination level how the market's doing, or even who's coming, right? They know who's coming from a hotel. Another part of that is looking at every hotel knows what their guests do while they're on property, but they really very rarely have any idea what they're doing as soon as they leave those doors. So being able to kind of to better understand the visitors, both to individual areas of a market as well as those who repeat visitors come back. Do they do the same thing time and time again, or do they do new things? Are they looking for new experiences? So tracking those kind of trends within the market is extremely important. A lot of, there's so much data out there, and sometimes can be extremely overwhelming, especially for those who have smaller teams or no teams on the research side. So our goal really with Symphony, when we built that business intelligence platform, was to make the data, aggregate all those different data points into one place where you can more easily digest it and share it with internal partners or external partners to more efficiently help with some of your strategies. Another thing that attractions and hotels and airlines don't necessarily look at as much as a destination marketing organization is travel intent, right? And how does that differ from country to country in terms of how they're feeling about travel, especially during COVID or coming out of COVID, but really something that we should all look at on an ongoing basis.
Thanks for that, Eric. Gabe, I'm going to come on to you. We've talked a lot about data and how data is evolving. What would you say if you were speaking with a new client? How important is change in approach versus past experience? Because obviously past experience is key in how we do things and how we move forward. But as we evolve through the changes in the way that we use data, how would you advise, erring on the experience that they've got as well?
Yeah, no, good question. So I think there's a couple of elements at play here, and the first is, Eric, as you were describing, the platform that you offer and all of these diverse data sets that you have. I'm thinking from the destination perspective. Well, that's such a powerful resource, and in such a compelling way to tie that into especially your marketing KPIs. And we do an awful lot of research around the types of KPIs that DMOs are using, and looking at what are those sort of emerging trends in terms of those reporting indicators. And so there's all of these sort of traditional DMO indicators that we grew up very familiar with, kind of rooted in this heads and beds model. How many people are coming into the destination? How much are they spending? What's the ADR? What's your occupancy rates? You can layer in, certain more sophisticated elements like you're starting to describe about how the visitor is actually flowing through the destination, where that spend is actually occurring. You can layer in, this other sort of business intelligence data as well, talking about, data from airlines and arrival data and, the kinds of data that my colleague from Airbnb was mentioning. I think that's all, you know, really interesting and really fascinating, and makes marketers better at their jobs. But the data sets that I would encourage people to think about as well, you know, with all respect to my colleagues here, is thinking again about these sort of impact indicators. And so going back to this idea of how the DMO is actually telling the story beyond attracting visitors, but looking at, okay, how are you actually leveraging the industry, and how are you reporting on the impacts that you're making through the industry and leveraging data to do that? And so, you know, in our research, and we've got a report that comes out every 2 years that looks specifically at these KPIs, we see KPIs around, you know, these sort of marketing indicators, you know, conversion rates and social media metrics becoming less and less important, and more sort of quantitative data becomes more important. And so you see things like the visitor experience and the visitor satisfaction with the destination becomes much more important. You see things like the resident satisfaction. So how happy are the people in your destination with the work that you're doing, or with the impact? Going out and looking at stakeholder satisfaction with the DMO from the hospitality community. And so leveraging data in order to start to answer those questions becomes very, very important. And so we encourage members to go out and start doing like resident satisfaction surveys, for instance, and then thinking about how you're actually able to take that information and start to tell a story around what you're doing. And so you're saying, yes, you know, we're attracting more and more people, but we're not doing that to the detriment of the destination. In fact, by doing that, we're improving the quality of life for residents in our destination. For instance, we're creating more jobs, driving more economic impact. And so whatever you're able to do to actually layer that in with these other sort of data sets that you're talking about just tells a more complete story. And I think it really answers that why question, and not just the how, but why it is that you're doing what you're doing. And so, yeah, I would say balancing those kind of old traditional indicators that we're talking about with these sort of new indicators is the challenge.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, Gadi, with that in mind, you know, data is changing so much, and we're using it and relying on it so much more as a business. How does that change across stakeholders? You know, how do you get more than just the research team using the data? How can it be used more across your marketing teams, your C-suite, etc.?
So, at the end of the day, Airbnb is a tech company in the travel industry, right? So we try to leverage our data as we try to innovate. And one of the things that we use a lot is machine learning. So machine learning is great internally and externally. So one example of that would be sorting the listings into categories. That might sound very basic, but the simple idea of that and enhancing this kind of capacity to sort the right listings into the right categories, then enhancing those categories to promote accommodation as a destination, we use machine learning for that. We have that for translation engines as well that are important. It's a global company with global guests, global travelers. And lastly, we have, for example, our screening technology for reservations uses machine learning to identify high-risk reservations and prevent, for example, parties from happening on Airbnb. So we're trying at the moment to prepare for a kind of record-setting travel season. We're expecting about 300 million people to take the road in this coming season. And we're trying to innovate when it comes to services, when it comes to the platform itself. And I think one of the most important metric or data that any stakeholder within the company can use is the feedback from our community. And that's, of course, Airbnb specific, but I'm guessing all companies could use that. So what we've done is we've started storyboarding the journey of our hosts and our guests, because we have to take the two into consideration. And from sign up to checkout and every step in between. So we've started to create a blueprint of every single thing they do on the platform, from screens, policies, to every customer support interaction from start to finish. And then what's important here, and this is where the data comes into play, we've analyzed millions of customer support tickets across this entire journey in order to be able to map all the different steps that they're taking. We've analyzed and read thousands of social media posts, And we've actually spoken to hundreds of thousands of guests and hosts to understand, hey, what do you need from us? Like, what can we improve in terms of service, platform, etc. So the result of this is, I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but we have 2 annual releases when it comes to features and products in May and in November. The latest one was yesterday, M3. So I invite everyone to actually go on the website and listen to that release. And those features are the direct result of the community and what they want from us. An example of that, again, can seem pretty basic, but when you used to go on Airbnb, you had the price. And then once you go into the listing itself, you see the additional fees, like service fees, cleaning fees, and stuff. So our guests were simply asking to have full transparency when it comes to the pricing at the beginning. So now anywhere on the app, whether you're on the Maps tab, whether you're on the listing, you have the full price display in order for you to make a quicker decision on whether you want that accommodation or not. Another thing, this time for the hosts, we've analyzed and seen that guests are, 1, a bit more price sensitive nowadays, and 2, they're extremely value driven. So what we're trying to do is give the tools to our hosts to kind of tackle that rising trend. And it's important to know that our hosts can be individuals like my grandma in my village in Lebanon, and it could be like a company that has thousands of employees and multiple thousands of listings. So we're giving them now tools, 1 for seamless setup of their prices, and then to be able to compare their listings with other listings in similar areas to understand where they position themselves and how they should position themselves. So those are just examples of how we kind of use all the data that we have across the company, because everyone is working towards the same goal. And then we spread that data through updates, platform updates, and features that both our guests and our hosts can use.
Thank you for that. It was really interesting to hear. It's good to see it in practice and how things are being put through.
Go to the website.
I saw as well that on the new update that I was really excited about is it shows before you make the listing the checkout procedures. So
that was
if
my
you
third
have to
point.
wash the sheets or wash the towels or clean the toilet before you leave, it tells you that up front, which I think that's a big improvement for the platform.
So this was basically like requested from our guests, because sometimes they were just confused about what they should do when checking out of an apartment or a villa. And now hosts can go and set up those clear instructions as to leave the key on the door, do this, do that, and then all the journey is seamless. So thank you. That was actually my third point. I thought I spoke too much.
No, you're good. It's great to see it in practice. Dave, I just want to come back to this question around quality. There's an awful lot of data out there now. We're collecting more. How do we ensure it's the correct data? How do we make sure we're using it efficiently? How do we go about all of that?
Yep. You've said exactly that, yeah. There's a lot of data. I think that's become clear from a lot of the discussion. There is, huge amounts of data out there. You want it all to be the best quality, obviously. You want to be able to trust it. But, you do need to have that understanding of limitations. I think the key to it is having the right tools for interrogating it, having the right platforms for looking at it, and listening to the last two descriptions. A lot coming from sort of the DMO side, a lot coming from the business side, and I think there does need to be sort of that greater dialogue, and there's a real sort of role which is largely be filled by sort of DMOs or sort of some larger organisation just to help sort of collate that research. It is a lot to expect to have that real sort of quality for analysis sitting within every single business, every business being able to fully access and sort of really interrogate the data to the best ability. So it is all about sort of building that community, having some central stock of skills, having some sort of really good platforms, really good data collation, and someone, whether it's DMO or whether it's sort of a larger provider, an Airbnb, or likewise other accommodation providers are available. We do have to say, unfortunately, but having that wider role and building the community.
Perfect. We're coming towards the end of this session, but there's a couple more points I just want to get to. Gabe, a last sort of point from you. Visitor management programs. They're a big part of what Destinations International does. Could you explain a little bit more about how it works, firstly, and then also how data is used in tracking performance?
Yeah, sure. And again, I think this ties back to the point I was making before about leveraging data beyond just marketing strategy and making smart tactical marketing or sales decisions. So what we see with DMOs is getting obviously much more involved in this idea of destination management and how is the DMO not just involved in that demand side of the equation, that sales and marketing, but actually controlling the supply side as well. So this looks different in different places, but this trend among DMOs in terms of getting more involved in the management side obviously is ongoing and accelerating. And so the question of how they're actually leveraging data in this destination management role is a good one. And when we were talking earlier, I referenced this idea of, again, the ability to track where visitors are actually going within the destination. So looking at location-based data, which is really, really interesting. And as somebody who's tasked with destination management, is just a fascinating resource and really, really lends the opportunity to understand at a high level of detail how the traveler is actually behaving within the destination. And so what that actually allows you to do then is to start to make smart decisions about how you're actually controlling certain assets within the destination. And so you can look at, say, highly trafficked areas and start to make decisions around things like traffic patterns and how the DMO starts to actually collaborate and share that data out with other stakeholders, within the destination. If there's major events that are going on, like this, you can actually start to see where those visitors are going and then start to make smart decisions that you can go out to your stakeholders, whether that's the restaurant community, for instance, and you can start to say, okay, we've got 30,000 people coming in. You can share this information in advance, and the stakeholders can use that information to start to make decisions around like staffing, for instance, or adjusting their hours, or even adjusting their menus as appropriate, to suit this audience. And of course, to take that information out to the hospitality and hotel community to do the same thing. And then what we see as well is, again, being able to leverage, the location-based data to do things like adjust marketing strategy. So what we see in some destinations that are dealing with like over-tourism issues, right? Or these destinations that, they say are being like loved to death. There's too many people coming in, they're too concentrated in one area. Well, when you're able to leverage this kind of data to understand this and actually see this visualized, then that ties into how you're actually doing your promotion. And so you can say, okay, we know that at certain times of day or certain times of the year, in certain seasons, even days of the week, we see clusters of activity in these areas. And so we know that needs to feed back into our marketing strategy, into our communication strategy, where we're actually able to start to distribute this visitation into other parts of the destination. And so, yeah, and the opportunities there are really endless. So yeah, I guess I'm starting to ramble here, but the idea is that this opportunity to leverage this location-based data and to start to make decisions about how you're actually controlling that behavior and driving that and incentivizing people to move in different ways is really, really powerful and exciting.
No, perfect. I mean, I think we've established that the data really is key and sets a good scene for everything that we're doing. Eric, I just want to finish up with you. Moving on to the interactions part of this session, how can we improve the use of data through the findings? How do we make it more accessible for people to actually understand what they're looking at and make it more of a one-stop solution for everyone in the company?
Right. I think for all of us up here and many people in the room, we're used to looking at data. Data, that's not for everyone, right? Data could be overwhelming to some people. And that's okay. What we, as analysts and business intelligence people need to help with is, hey, out of all the different data sources that you subscribe to, right? Whether it be airline data, short-term rental data, forecasting, all those different components that you as again, talking about it from a destination level, all those different areas that you as a destination level, all that data do you have? What does it really mean at the end of the day? And there's two components of it, right? It's that organizational metric. It's the more market level detail that you're looking at. But how to bring it all together and I think we mentioned storytelling earlier as well. What does it really mean, and how can you most effectively get that message out to, again, both your internal and external stakeholders? I think what some of the things that a platform like a business intelligence platform like Symphony or others do is really helping you more efficient with your time, get more of the data out to more people, and really expanding the value that you get out of all these individual data sets that you're subscribing to. We had one partner that would be spending way north of 6 figures in terms of US dollars on data every year. They did not have an internal person, an analyst, to really work with the data or to really understand the data. So when we came in and we really helped them, the first thing we do is look at all the different data sets that they subscribe to. And kind of do like a data audit, essentially. Looking at, okay, what's relevant? Well, you don't have an airport. Well, you're looking at airport data, right? Instead, look at how people are getting there. How far are people traveling to your destination? How's that changing by seasonality? We look at credit card spending to better understand the seasonality of those visitors, but also better understand what do people, we recently had a client, Augusta in Georgia in the US. They have a small golf tournament, you may have heard of the Masters, every year. And I get a call from one of our data analysts and they're like, something's funky with this credit card data, it's not looking right. I was like, what's going on? It's like the spending every March or April is just through the roof. And so different than the rest of the year. I was like, well, that's the Masters, right? But not just the spending in terms of total, but what the visitors spent money on was very different. What merchants they went to during their visit was very different. So it's a completely different type of traveler that comes to that market for that 1 week every year than what they get for the rest of the year. So, like platforms like this that can help you really get down and look at that in detail at a super efficient and fast level, I think is key for a lot of destinations. And let's be honest, there's often a lot of turnover in our industry. So having something that you're constantly looking at and always refreshing and updating and keeping the whole team up to date on an ongoing basis, whether again that's internal or external stakeholders, it's just becoming more and more important. And as the industry evolves, as data evolves, you're always able to bring in new data sets, right, into the data warehouse and look at things, again, in a cohesive manner, aggregated way, triangulating it, layering on top of each other. We do one thing with, for example, with geolocation data and Google Analytics data or even digital media, where in addition to seeing who's coming to your market, where within the market they go, you're also able to see out of everyone who goes to your website, how many of them actually showed up in market, right? And what did they do when they did show up in market? Is there a difference between the behaviors there, right? Now the attribution thing is getting a little trickier, especially with privacy laws. So you don't want to hitch the entire wagon to one data set, but for now that's still extremely helpful to understand. And you can do the same thing with digital media and individual campaigns as well. So I think for destinations as a whole, having a better understanding of what's happening in the market overall and instant access. You don't need yesterday's data today. It would be great if we had it, but that's just not how the data works just yet, right? But having instant access to your data by audience, again, both internal and external audiences and even individual audiences, whether you're talking to your restaurant partners, your lodging partners, or others, is extremely important. And lastly, I just want to touch on the importance of evolving with the times, right? If we were only looking at lodging data, for example, if we were only looking at hotel data right now to better understand whether or not the lodging industry had fully recovered from COVID or from 2019 or we're back to normal levels, you'd be missing a huge piece of that because of how far and how much of that overnight demand is now in the short-term rental or lodging space. So having an ability to kind of look at it holistically is critical.
That was perfect. We've got 0 seconds left. So with that in mind, thank you very much for listening. We will hang around, so if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to come on up to any of the panelists. But I'd like to give a round of applause for our panelists, and thank you very much for attending.